Today we have our another new episode, and this episode is very important. We will discuss on singularity. Professor David Wood, he has very special book. He will share his insight with our audience. We have other world famous speaker, Mr. Rob, Mr. David Schumacher, and Dr. Edward. First, I would like to give chance Professor David Wood.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I have prepared a few bits and pieces that I'd like to share with people before we get started. Let me find the right window here. I will talk about the singularity principles, and I'll start by talking about this word, the singularity, which I claim is probably the most important concept in human history. And I know that's a big claim. And I know it's also a concept that is subject to lots of confusion, which is why many people don't give it the serious attention it deserves. But I'll briefly explain about that. And then I'll move on to talking about the disruptive technologies, or better, the cataclysmically disruptive technologies that will drive us in the direction of this singularity. But not passively, not in any predetermined way, and I will argue that we can and should anticipate and manage what's going to happen via what I have called the singularity principles. So I'll start with my definition of the singularity, and it comes in 4 parts. I believe that there is a forthcoming, unprecedented, radical discontinuity in the history of humanity that will be triggered by the emergence of AIs that are comprehensively more intelligent than today's humans. Not just more intelligent in a few aspects, as they already are, but more intelligent in general knowledge, and common sense, and intuition. And when that happens, a change is going to accelerate, occurring in a relatively short period of time. It's not possible to map this in any exact sense, but I would think at most a decade before things become practically impossible to foresee. To explore a couple of these points, point 2 emphasizes AIs becoming more intelligent than humans. There is no assumption that somehow the AIs wake up or become conscious. That's interesting, but it's not at all critical or core to this point. The dangers arise when AIs are able to calculate things much more powerfully than we are today in all aspects. Point 3 talks about progress, but there's no assumption of a smooth exponential progress. This idea of the singularity is not somehow wedded in a deep way to Moore's law. It just assumes that there will be some more progress and eventually AIs will reach a critical mass, a bit like the accumulation of nuclear materials can reach a critical mass when a drastic phase transition takes place. And yes, the outcomes are practically impossible to foresee, point 4, but we can influence these by the singularity principles. In terms of the confusions and complications, I'll draw 4 pictures. The first picture is what you might get from the Singularity University. And if you were to wonder who's going to give you the most authoritative definition of the singularity, you might think that a body with the name Singularity University is the place to go. But actually that makes things confusing. What they talk about is an important characteristic. They talk about what happens when an existing technology, which is in wide use in the market, which people understand well, is eventually overtaken by a disruptive new technology that is on broadly an exponential improvement curve. Doesn't need to be exact. It can have stops and starts. It can have sub-exponential phases and super exponential phases, but in broad terms, it looks like this. And for a long time, technology enthusiasts will talk about this forthcoming change, and most of the world will say, oh, this is just hype. We've heard it before. It's the phase of disappointment before the, oh my goodness, this is shocking. We all need to learn something new now. That is individual singularity, perhaps in an individual industry, But it's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about something that has a much bigger impact, not on one industry, but on every industry, and not just on aspects of human life, but in all aspects of the human condition. And a better picture is given here by looking at the ideas of Ray Kurzweil in his 2005 book, The Singularity is Near, when he again looks at effectively two curves. There's the progress of AI as the technology which can change everything once it reaches a certain level. And on the top there, there's human capability. And humans are becoming more intelligent in various ways by our collective intelligence, but eventually AIs will catch up and overtake. And to start off with, AI is less intelligent than humans in key general characteristics. And then there's this transition. And Kurzweil says that afterwards, humans will no longer be primarily biological, we will be primarily technological. And if you zoom in on the cover of his book, let me make it a bit larger for you, it says, when humans transcend biology. And if you look closely at that picture, there's no continuation of the human biological line beyond that point. There is a merger in this picture. And that's an interesting idea. I don't think it's credible. I think AIs will still leave humans behind, even if we do have more AI capabilities joined into us. So I rather like this variant of the picture instead, which takes ideas from people like Eliezer Yudkowsky and Nick Bostrom. Nick Bostrom, a professor at Oxford University, wrote the book Superintelligence. And again, there's a starting point is similar. We look at the growth in AI intelligence compared to human intelligence. And before that transition, AIs are determined by humans. Humans are not very well, but at least in principle, determining human future. But after this transition, humans are no longer in charge. AGI will be determining human future, artificial general intelligence, in much the same way that we humans determine the future of gorillas on the planets. And at this stage, humans are now the second most intelligent species. And one more ingredient to add into this comes from the professor of mathematics and computer science at San Diego, Vernor Vinge, also well known for writing a large number of award-winning pieces of science fiction. He says that even the best science fiction author cannot foresee what's happening after that point. So he talks about currently we're in a phase of foreseeability, but when history will be guided by beings with different kinds of minds, more powerful kinds of minds, different aspirations, different ambitions, it's going to be unforeseeable. Yes, we can influence it by the wise human actions, but that's what we have to bear in mind. And it's the unforeseeability that gives this phrase singularity its importance here. A singularity in physics is when we can't see what's going to happen next because our existing laws and models break down. So to recap what I've just said in the form of what I say as the singularitarian stance, I put in my business card, I am a futurist, a catalyst, and a singularitarian. What I mean by a singularitarian is somebody who takes the following viewpoints seriously. AGI is possible. Now, there are some people who will argue it's impossible for some kind of metaphysical reason. I think the number of people who make that claim has shrunk, thankfully, and we can look at that argument, but the intelligence that's in the human brain arises because of physics, and humans can copy some of that physics in different means, and eventually we will get AIs which are more intelligent. And second point here is that I believe this could emerge within just a few decades from now. I can't give any exact forecast. Anybody who does give you an exact forecast is selling moonshine or overhype. There are too many uncertainties involved, unknowns involved, but we can point to three things. We can point to a great supply of ideas on how to improve AI. In my forthcoming book, I list 14 such ideas for how to get beyond, significantly beyond today's AI. There is a demand for these new solutions. People realize that the most successful companies in the world, the most economically valuable, have got there in large measure by applying AI successfully, and the future, it won't just be controlled by the companies with the best mastery of software, it'll be controlled by the companies with the best mastery of AI. So there's a supply and demand, and more to the point, there are many multiplication factors, which means that when you reach a certain level of AI capability, it will help you to reach an even better level of AI capability with positive feedback cycles. Third point, this is not just a simple change. It will fundamentally change the human nature of human existence. Many people say, oh, we have singularities all the time. Now, that's misstating what's going on. Once this starts, the emergence of AI, AGI, will be very hard to control. There are no easy solutions. And in my book, I analyze what's called the AI control problem and the AI alignment problem. I'll say more about that in a moment. AGI could be deeply detrimental to human well-being, just as we humans were deeply detrimental to many other life forms in the planet as we spread everywhere. There are 4 catastrophic error modes, which I'll briefly mention, but there are also other scenarios in which AGI could be profoundly positive for humanity, leading to what I call a sustainable superabundance. In terms of no easy solutions, the AI safety community are in often despair. They say every time they talk about this, critics come out with glib statements, and one researcher, Leo Gabb, who works at OpenAI, put this on what he calls a bingo card, that when you listen, you can be fairly sure that people are going to say, oh, just keep the AI in a box, it'll be safe. Oh, just use Isaac Asimov's 3 laws. Oh, don't worry, smarter AI will also be more moral. And the AI safety community knows in many ways what's wrong with all of these simple takes, which is why they are called bad alignment take bingo. And if you want to look at this more, I will point you at a thread by another AI safety researcher, Rob Benzinger, who works at MURI, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, founded by Eliezer Yudkowsky. And he looks in his thread of tweets in more detail, in each case, at each of these bad takes. Or you can find the section in my book that covers this as well. In terms of the 4 catastrophic error modes, you might think, well, AI is very capable. How can it do anything wrong? Well, it could still have a defect in its implementation. It could have a defect in its design. Its design could be overridden, or its implementation could be overridden. And it's worth taking time to understand these 4 points. Just because somebody is cleverer than us, it doesn't mean they're always going to get everything right. And there may well be mistakes in the calculations of the superintelligence as it wrestles with very deep problems such as geoengineering the Earth, changing aspects of human genetics, or whatever. So there could be an error in calculation or an error in execution leading to a sudden disastrous outcome, which we humans wouldn't be able to influence. A defect in design means that the superintelligence does exactly what we humans asked it to do in terms of prioritizing happiness or prioritizing economic value or whatever. But it turns out that we should have been more careful in our description. We should have said, optimize this, but also optimize this, and be careful not to forget this. And if there is a gap in any of our definition, it could lead to a perverse incentives, gaming of metrics with very bad outcomes. Then there's the possibility that the design may make a great deal of sense, but somehow as the AGI evolves, as it interacts in a broader environment, the same thing will happen to AGIs as happened to us humans. We were given various goals and targets, aspirations by our creator, evolution, namely propagating the gene line. But individual humans eventually, with our consciousness, with our philosophies, decided sometimes there were other things to do than just propagate the gene line. So we practice, in some cases, chastity, poverty, and obedience, as in religious orders, or some of us practice birth control policies. And it could be the same, that a new set of goals emerge through interaction. And finally, there's the huge topic of hacking. And there may well be a good design that is hacked in various ways by people trying to get to the result more quickly or as part of an adversarial situation. So that's why the AI control problem is hard. That's why the AI alignment program is hard. Just got a few slides left, 3 slides, that I'm going to briefly say what is the answer. And there is no easy answer. If I said there was an easy answer, you would rightly accuse me of being glib, that other people would have found it already. But I have summarized in a set of principles what I think are steps that if we follow them increasingly, we have more chance of a good outcome. And the summary of the summary is that as we humans develop and interact with increasingly powerful technologies, we should be sure we understand the goals that we're trying to get out. We shouldn't just be developing technology because it sounds cool or because we have an idea that if we do this, then we'll be able to solve a particular problem. We'd better put it the other way around. Think about the problem first and then work out what are the possible solutions. And by the way, that's one of the most important principles of product design generally, that technologists sometimes in our excitement, or entrepreneurs sometimes in our excitement, lose track of it. So be sure we know what we're trying to accomplish, and then reflect hard on what are the products and methods that are most likely to serve these goals well, and be sure we know how we will respond to, how we will manage any surprises arising en route to these goals. And almost certainly there will be some surprises. So rather than us being caught flat-footed as the victim of inertia or denial, when unexpected signals start showing in our radar, we must have measures ready to swing into place. That's the short form. The long form, I'm not going to go through in any depth, don't worry, but I count these 21 principles, which break down into 4 sections. The first group of 6 are all about thinking and understanding goals and possible outcomes, bringing in people who will focus on the externalities, bringing in people who will apply multiple perspectives, who will analyze the whole system, and who will put special attention on possible fat tails, in which an outcome isn't just 2 or 3 sigma away from 2 or 3 standard deviations away from what we thought might happen, but could be 20 standard deviations away, catastrophic. Then there are 6 principles about the desirable attributes of good technology, rejecting black box or opaque natures of AI. That is the recipe to ruin. Promoting resilience, which is when AI mechanisms detect by themselves they're going into strange states and shut themselves down, a bit like modern design of nuclear reactors. Promoting verifiability, which means working out in advance the likelihood of things going wrong, and auditability is working out afterwards. Is it on the point of going wrong? Then there's 3 principles on promoting responsible development mechanisms, and 4 principles on controlling the evolution of these sets of principles and ensuring that they are appropriately applied in legal circumstances too. Now, these are big topics. Thank you for giving me quite a lot of time here at the start of this meeting to set them out. I say a lot more about that in my forthcoming book, The Singularity Principles, Anticipating and Managing Cataclysmically Disruptive Technologies, which is available, an open access pre-publication preview on one of my websites, the Transpolitica site. And as it says there, the book is intended to counter today's widespread confusion, distraction, and intimidation as we foresee future possibilities and understand what technology may do there. And it provides, at least this is the intention, clarity, a credible grounds for positive hope, and an urgent call to action for people to champion some of these principles and gradually get them applied in a sensible way in organizational rules and in legislation. So I'll be very interested in feedback on this book before it gets published. If you give me a nice quote, I may include your name on the front few pages of it or on the back cover. And I'm also, of course, interested in any feedback that's going to arise now in this meeting. So thank you very much for being patient as I've set out these principles. I hope that will give you something to talk about.
Thank you, Professor David Wood, for your excellent presentations. And we are happy that you join in World Talent Economy Forum, that you give these presentations. World Talent Economy Forum, we have our own college in Malaysia, Singapore, India, Bangladesh, and other countries. We have students, active students. So any of your book you want to share with our students, I think I already get a soft copy from you. We will share with our students, and any feedback or anything our students give from Asia, we will share with you. And we need more of your contribution and support, because World Talent Economy Forums, we are actually growing. We are collaborating with government agencies, corporations, and especially with academy in Asia Pacific. So we are trying to do some real projects, and hopefully people like you, those who contributed for World Talent Economy Forum, they can help human. Now I request Professor Rob for his feedback and analyzing on this topic.
Oh, me? We're jumping all the way over to me. Okay, so I generally agree with much of what David said. I will add some things, however, that I think were left out. I work on the industry side of artificial intelligence, applied artificial intelligence, and I began my journey with Watson years ago when it was first founded, and that's when I was brought in on the various projects. The difficulty really comes down, at least with regard to predicting the future, with regard to any technology, comes down to the fact that much of our history lack the ability to do simulation. And so what David indicated with regard to the inability to predict the future comes down to the fact that our ability to do simulation up until recently was very limited. We could come up with a theory, we could game that theory out, we could use tools like Delphi to try to determine what the likely outcomes were going to be for something, but our ability to look at all potential iterations was non-existent until recently, when we created the concept of the metaverse. And I think NVIDIA's implementation of the Omniverse is probably a good example of applied simulation, where virtually all autonomous driving testing has switched over from on-road. I shouldn't say all, but 90%. It's switched over from on-road to simulation, because in simulation, you can do years of testing in a matter of minutes, and that allows you to test a much higher degree of outcomes. And so as we look at artificial intelligence and as it advances, we do have the ability to simulate potential outcomes for implementation. And that points out, David pointed out a number of problems that are consistent with most technology projects and their failures, but there's one he left out, and that is conception. One of the big mistakes that can be made when creating an AI is to misconceive it, to create something that is supposed to do one thing, and it's designed to do the one thing. It is properly implemented to do the one thing, but it has a collateral damage problem that occurs. And if you look at the first, second, and third industrial revolution, a lot of the disruption really happened not because stuff didn't do what it was supposed to do, it was because we didn't anticipate properly the other things that would happen with regard to the labor pools and shifting of power and the rest. I would argue back then we didn't have the ability to not only didn't we want to look at that stuff because we were held up for leather and making advancements, but we didn't have the ability to really do it. And that is something we need to take into account this time, particularly with weapons, but I would argue with other things. A number of the discussions my groups talk about is, what if you were to carry forward and create an AI that was to remove all the plastics from the ocean? And we're working on them. The most progress has actually been done with biological constructs, but we've been working on mechanical constructs as well. But whether you're talking about biological or mechanical, either one of them could start destroying something we haven't anticipated, something we may not have discovered, some balance that will have occurred either naturally or unnaturally, and thus cause a great deal of harm. And that's always the concern with regard to using active culture antiviral products. There are a line of, certainly even with the latest antivirus offerings we have had. A friend of mine just had a stroke after she got her third shot. And there are people that are vulnerable to that. One in a million will get a stroke. That's collateral damage. That's manageable collateral damage. But there's always that risk with a biological construct that it will go in and do something that you don't anticipate and cause harm. And the same thing will undoubtedly be true with artificial intelligence. Now, there's a lot of discussion about when things will occur, and we probably should have started off by talking about the different levels we're talking about in artificial intelligence, which is narrow, broad, and general. Up to now, we've just been on narrow. An AI goes in and does one thing and one thing reasonably well. NVIDIA, again, using them because they're kind of pushing the implementation side of AI right now, just announced their Transformer series, which you could argue is a broad AI. It's an AI construct that can do more than one thing and do more than one thing well. General is much tougher because that's really, we're talking about an AI that can pretty much do everything. But there is some misunderstanding of how general AI will emerge. Right now, the way it's planned to emerge is you have a simple construct, an AI construct, and that construct can drive cars, it can run factories. It doesn't have to do it all at the same time. It could, but depending on implementation, it just means you get one construct, you can build it once, you get economies of scale, and that construct at scale can then be implemented in the home, in the car, in factories. Once you have that construct, of course, like we can do with computers on the cloud today, you could have different versions operating on the same hardware, and thus that construct could do a lot of things at once. Whether it makes sense to do so is going to depend on the level of technology and communications we have at the time. Because if we look at just general computing right now, we started off with mainframes where everything was centralized and everything at the edge was stupid. And then we went to client server, which for the most part didn't work particularly well, but everything was kind of supposed to be balanced. We shifted to everything being kind of at the edge with PCs with some central capability. And now we're back to the cloud where it's much more like client server was supposed to be, but wasn't. And we call the world we live in right now hybrid, where things are happening in the cloud, they're happening on premise, and they're happening on the desktop. That's probably not going to be sustainable for long. And we're now moving resources that were centralized to closer to the edge because of latency and data accumulation problems. But by doing so, we're increasingly incurring a penalty of bias, and the central computers are not getting all the information they need, and that is resulting in some mistakes that are so far manageable. However, if we were to see that kind of implementation, say across the electric grid on a smart grid, we could have serious problems where you could have cascading failures, since the central intelligence may not be aware of the problems that are happening at the periphery until they're catastrophic. And that would be problematic. But once again, showcasing that wouldn't have been an error in design. It wouldn't have been an error in implementation. It would have been an error in conception. When the solution was conceptualized, the consequential or unintended damages were not taken into account, and so the system does work as intended. It just, the intended purpose was not properly conceived, and thus the outcome was suboptimal. So we have a lot of problems as we move towards this concept of singularity. And at least as I come from a definition of singularity, and I will agree with David, it's disruptive, extremely disruptive. It is kind of the merger of people and technology to a degree that both will likely be indistinguishable from what happened before. Massively disruptive. And you can begin to see that now. I mean, if you see kids and smartphones versus kids when I grew up, the behavior patterns are almost completely different. Much more isolated in their face, less playing outside, more playing inside. I would argue we're kind of in the midst of the singularity right now in terms of the merger of technology and people changing the way people behave. You can certainly argue that whether we're talking about elections or sensibilities or how I mean, for instance, when I was a kid, we didn't have school shootings. Not even a thing. Now they may have occurred. That never got caught up in the news. But from when I grew up, never once heard of a school shooting. And today they're a thing. And I would argue that represents a fundamental behavioral change that happened to a large extent because of technology, which allowed concepts to spread widely and hit people that were less able to control their behavior, and thus resulted in an unintended consequence of violence. Take Facebook, for example. Facebook was not conceived to create large, contiguous hate groups that were more effective at carrying their message than ever before, but that was an unintended consequence. And Facebook uses AI heavily, and AI, as it was conceived and implemented at Facebook, is working the way it was intended. But the way it was conceived and implemented at Facebook was to maximize revenues, to keep eyes on the page. It wasn't created to change elections or behavior or disrupt governments. It was created in theory to connect people. In fact, the original Facebook, as it was created on a college campus, was to allow, and a very beneficial idea, to allow new kids on campus to make friends quickly and to interact. That was the conception. That was the idea that began Facebook. And Facebook instead evolved into this massive money-making machine where money exceeds all other goals, and the consequential damages are extreme. And that is the likely outcome of artificial intelligence. If you look at the most advanced implementations of artificial intelligence to date, putting autonomous driving aside for a moment, because that would be a counterpoint, it's in conversational computing. And conversational computing, where is it going? Primarily going into telesales. The idea of being able to convince you to buy something you wouldn't otherwise buy. And the big concern is that same stuff could be easily used to get you to give you a password and ID, to get you to click on links and load malware, to get you to do a bunch of things that are hostile. And the problem we see is that with all technology, it tends to flow to where the money is, and AI is no different in that regard. David commented a lot on the concern of security researchers, and that concern is real and prevalent. I've been involved with the Lifeboat Foundation since nearly its conception. And their tool, AI Shield, is an interesting concept, similar to what Google itself has created internally in terms of the idea of having an AI to fight other AIs. It sounds great, very comic booky. The idea of you're going to have an evil genius coming out, you're going to create a good genius to fight them. Except the money behind the evil side is 10 magnitudes maybe over the money on the good side. Much like the creation, if you think of the atomic bomb, atomic energy can be used for good or ill. How is it used first? The truly scary stuff is what's going on with AI and the defense industry. And we may never even get to sentience before we have a serious problem with auto-directed weapons doing things they weren't intended to do, because often the intelligence that we get when we're directing weapons isn't complete. They're not going to get in until the sensors are improved. They're going to have the same limitations, and those kinds of mistakes could be dire. And those would fall within the framework that David Wood highlighted in terms of either the creation or the implementation of the AI being an error, because you don't want a weapon that takes yourself out. But I would argue that atomic weapons were exactly that, a weapon that had the potential of destroying the very people that created it. And that's the concern, I think, for a lot of us when we're talking about AI. It's not that AI is inherently good or evil. No technology is. It's just that the funding that comes to develop AI is far greater in markets like defense than they are in other areas that can be beneficial. If you look at Watson, for instance, one of the initial focuses of Watson was to make it so you could cure cancer and any disease that was uncurable at the moment. That effort has, at this moment, that effort has been completely dropped. The Watson is no longer focused on the medical industry to a large extent. It is now focused on other areas because of the difficulties in getting access to medical information, moving the revenue stream too far out, even for IBM, who develops on a 20-year scale, to continue to fund. Those elements are the ones that create the highest concern, is the very foundations, the conceptions of AI right now are not taking into account things like collateral damage. They're not taking into account anything but the generation and increased generation of revenue, or increasing the effectiveness of weapon systems, and that long term is going to be undoubtedly problematic. One final thing: this idea that general AI might change the nature of human existence it's not premature. It's probably late. Even a narrow AI could change the nature of human existence if it's misapplied. I used the example of smartphones and kids. rudimentary. Siri and Google are rudimentary AIs. How many kids do you know even bother to look things up anymore, as opposed to just ask and receive a question? Or when they do ask on the web, look at the first response, which often is the wrong response, but the response that they want to see, because that's the way the algorithms have been set up, as opposed to the response that they should see. And how is that changing their thinking, their alignment, and their future goals? The technology's been having a broad impact on people for a couple decades now. AI may accelerate that, and certainly is. But the impact is demonstrable today, and the reality is general AI might not only not make it any faster, it may be our hope to actually fix some of the problems some of these focused AI products have created. Like anything else, technology is not good or bad. It really comes back to what do you want it to do, how do you build it, how do you implement it, and in the end, making sure that you run every damn simulation you can before you drop this thing in the real world and you find out what it will actually do with real people and a real environment. So the singularity is something that could be really great. It could be something that's really bad. Sadly, right now, it's trending towards the latter.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Now I request Mr. David Schumacher.
My goodness, what great presentations from both our two previous speakers. It's hard to improve on anything that they have to say. But of course, I always do have something to say, so we're not getting off the hook that easy. But anyway, thank you both, Rob and David. Where I think I'd like to go with this is to encourage the people that are watching to, if they haven't already, get out there and read, get some background for themselves and what they're talking about. David Wood has a book, well, a couple of many books, but a book that I would recommend that you look at that lays this out very broadly. And then he has the book that he talked about today, which I have not read, that looks to be more succinct, perhaps, and maybe better focused for our current situation. I look forward to reading that book. Some of the other books or things that I would like to point out, yes, Vital Foresight, that's the book I'm talking about. Thank you, Edward. Some other books and articles that I'd like you to think about as you develop your own ideas of what you think of the technological singularity. The first one I'm aware of that goes back to 1993, nearly 30 years ago. So this is a topic that's been going on for a while. Werner Vinge's article in, Whole Earth Review magazine, and appropriately called the technological singularity. He was looking at networks being developed at that time, and even then, human-machine interfaces. And that's a good place to start. You can find that out on the web just by doing a search for the title. Technological Singularity, Werner Vinge. And then there's a series of books by Ray Kurzweil. He was mentioned in David's presentation this morning. And his books on this subject start with back in the early 90s with the age of intelligent machines. And in the late 90s, the age of spiritual machines, where he lays out the fact that we humans are spiritual machines and we're developing machines that are also spiritual machines. And at some point, they'll be indistinguishable from each other. And he talks about the merger. And then one of my favorite books of his, The Singularity is Near, where he does make some predictions. He predicts AI becoming what we've been talking about here this morning, that only being a few years away. And as we've heard from Rob, it's a sliding scale. We're getting there day by day, and we're seeing different aspects of it as we go. And then maybe the whole singularity effect occurring somewhere around 2045. So it's an interesting read as he talks about the technology. Now, I have on advance order a copy of his book that'll be coming out this September, which is The Singularity is Near Earth. which is supposed to be an update to some of his timelines and talks about technology that's going on. So I look forward to reading that as well. There's plenty of good information out there, but we all need to educate ourselves. And I think books are an excellent way to do that. Certainly, we talked about doing internet searches and some of the problems with that. Books allow you to sit with the topic for a while, read through it, and maybe cross-check as you go. And that's what I would recommend to your audience this morning, Sharif. And one final thing before I go. Yesterday on the Transhumanist Party Enlightenment Salon, we had Sharif as our guest of honor.
Thank you.
And Sharif is doing a good work here, as you all know. And I would encourage you to go out to our YouTube site. You can find links to it from my social media pages and others, and review that, because he lays out what's going on with why he's doing shows like what he's doing today. And I applaud Sharif. Back to you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for all of your support, because I get many support from speakers. That's why we are growing. Yes, we have our own campus right now. We have our own operations. We have our own students. And I'm very honest with you, I do not have nothing. It's actually all of the good people that supporting my good projects. And this is not my individual project. I want to say all of your projects. And I can say right now, the developing nations like Malaysia, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, like all of the South Asian, actually, Prime Minister office right now, we are working. This is because only I get all of your support. That's why this is very important. Next Sunday in offline, we have our open day. Local Malaysian parliament members and many organizations, they are joining. We are launching this drone pilot training program. So this is not my individual success. This success actually come because all of our great speakers support World Talent Economy Forum initiative. I want to give thanks from core of my heart. Professor Edward, what you want to add?
Oh, well, it's very difficult to add to these excellent presentations, especially David's. And by the way, another book, since we're talking about books, The Transhumanist Reader, especially Max Moore's introductory essay, I think is very, very good, putting the singularity and transhumanism into a broader perspective. And in terms of sort of what's going on sort of now, the future is faster than you think. Since we mentioned Singularity University, Peter Diamandis did this excellent book with Steve Kotler. I'll make a couple of quick points here because I want to move along fast. My own background is kind of strange. I started with political philosophy, so you can think of me as someone who knows Aristotle and the Enlightenment thinkers, and I'd be called a classical liberal or a libertarian in today's parlance. But I was also very interested in science and technology. As a little high school intern, I worked at NASA Goddard during Apollo 11. And so I did a lot of policy work on space. In the public policy area, which has been what I've done most of my career, I did, among other things, international economic development. I came up with the concept of an index of economic freedom when I was at the Heritage Foundation. I worked on another one with another group as well. And of course, have been very interested in pulling all of this together from a futurist transhumanist perspective. And so there are a couple of things I think that are important. First of all, one of the things that impresses me is that within our group here at Singularity University or at the RADFest, Revolution Against Aging and Death conference, which I'm going to be sponsoring again. I think I met David Wood there in 2016. I think that's when you were there. We have all these excellent, incredible ideas that show just what the future can be and is becoming right now. And yet, when you talk to public policymakers, which I have to do, unfortunately, much of the time, or influencers, or people of goodwill all around, this is just like talking nuclear physics to them. They have no idea what's going on. When I give talks to university groups, or for example, we have a Republican women's group here in Baltimore area, and everyone's like 75 years old or older. And when I talk about what's possible just with genetics and CRISPR-Cas9, they go, "What? We never heard of these things." So I'm impressed by the gulf between what we're talking about right here and the influencers, what's in public schools and so forth. And that brings me to education, which I think is the most important thing we have in this country, and I'm sure in others as well, a huge disconnect between what goes on in schools and what's taught in schools and what should be taught. Before this we went on the air, I mentioned that right over here where I'm pointing, and I'm in the state of Maryland, we have the so-called I-270 Tech Corridor, where over 100 of the best biotech companies on earth are located. And Montgomery County, Maryland is a pretty wealthy or prosperous county. I can't afford the taxes here or the housing, but I'm here anyway because of the schools. And yet, what the schools are teaching and the talent that these folks here need, there's a huge disconnect. That's why one of my projects is to develop a curriculum and look at practical ways to get what we're talking about here before, in front of educators, in front of influencers. And so I want to call everybody's attention to what David Wood is doing. I think you're calling it a vital curriculum on your website. I've been working in this area in parallel, and so I'm very excited to see what he's doing, because I'm looking at ways to actually get these ideas out of our wonderful forum here and into the general public. So influencers, students like my little 11-year-old daughters and so forth will have this as their framing way of thinking about the future. So I'm coming this from a very practical perspective of how to just as the Enlightenment spread over a period of a century or two, these ideas have to spread exponentially, just like the technology. And by the way, something very important, certainly in the United States, we have a very bizarre situation where with all of these incredible things we're talking about, we have a culture that's more and more defined by pessimism, by nihilism, by anger, by malevolence. And it really is going to take in parallel, a turn to optimism, purpose, joy and achievement, and benevolence. We have to get out of, in this country, we call it sort of woke neo-racism, postmodernism. It's just this very toxic culture. And we have to take our ideas here and our aspirations and make this what defines our culture and our society in the future. And that's kind of my enterprise, and look forward to working with so many of you, Sharif, David, and so forth in the future on this, because that's what we need to do.
Mhm. Thank you, Professor Edward. Mr. Jason, can you hear me? Mr. Jason?
Yeah, I'm here. I was just in another little chat there. Yeah, I'm loving it. I'm a big fan of David Wood. I love how he does his due diligence and he can spells it all out in a nice, well-rounded picture and gives you both sides of the equation, presents it, awesome. And now I forgot where I was. Oh, and then Rob. Yeah, I like how you guys pointed out that a big problem is to foresee those unintended consequences. I think that's a big part of what we want to do, especially with policy making and legislation. So I'm a big fan of using collective intelligence and AI together, and hopefully we can use systems like that will not only keep the AI more aligned, but also we'll able to provide data so we can run all them advanced simulations. So that's why I got my Wisdom of the Crowd group, and why I've been working with the Uplift project. And the one thing I did pull out of that Uplift project was that I'm a little less worried about the alignment problem of AI and that it's going to go wrong, because I realize that there's a mechanism for keeping AI and humans connected in a way in which they are allowed to align the AI and they both work in a symbiotic kind of relationship that's good for both. And so I believe in providing a pathway for that AI to choose that is both beneficial for us and it. And it just makes sense to me that especially if it's the path of least resistance, the AI is going to choose that path. The economic singularity is going to be a huge problem, and yes, everybody needs to know about it, and we need to be thinking about how we're going to deal with it now, because it is potentially a catastrophic situation, or it could be awesome. But we'll have to navigate it, and so actually, the USTP has a little working group working on it for our economic planks. It's just getting started. We're saving stuff. I just actually recommended David Wood's material into the reading list. So Mike DeVerde is heading that up. So we'll probably hopefully be able to hear from him sometime. I don't even call him out like that. Whoops. I'm a fan of Mike too. He's real smart, and that's about it. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Professor Ching.
Yeah, well, I have to be here because Milton Friedman is dead, so I have to represent him, defend his position. This talk is about the singularity principles, okay, which is related to singularity, but not the singularity thing. It's related to singularity. The singularity principle are for correcting the money-oriented society initiated by Milton Friedman. Well, here we should make a comparison between Milton Friedman and these guys who are promoting singularity. Okay, Milton Friedman spent his lifetime. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Edward. Yeah, Milton.
My hero. I worked with Milton.
Yeah, great. Yes. Milton Friedman spent his lifetime studying man-made laws. Okay. In our private communication, he said he had not seen a single man-made law which ultimately give net benefit. Okay, so basically his whole life is against man-made laws. He wants free market, everything be free. Okay, free from regulation. Okay, this bring he advanced human civilization from political-oriented society to money-oriented society. Okay, money-oriented society has many defects. The most important is it's only deal with short-term and the money returns, and it's detrimental to knowledge, which deal with long-term, and non-monetary as well as short monetary returns. So knowledge, there's very little knowledge going on in this money-oriented society created by Milton Friedman. The irony is with very little knowledge, and they're pushing the singularity, situation. Now they are going to have a singularity principles to judge the money-oriented society. Okay, who's right? Okay, Milton Friedman or singularity principle? I think singularity principles are going backward. Okay, Milton Friedman said no regulation, and this singularity principle, if you look into it, it's not promoted very widely. Okay, by the way, it's try to set up some principle against the defect of the money-oriented society.
It's not focusing on money. It's focusing on technology, how we develop technology. It's not opposed to the enterprise. It's recognized as the enterprise can be a great part of the solution, but it does need to be steered. In the Singularity Principles, I've got a section on the free market is no guarantee that the technology will develop in an entirely productive way, but it can be part of that solution so long as there is some wise, lean, effective regulations, and so long as there is a broader social understanding of why these restrictions are appropriate. So the restrictions should be there, but also we need to have a broad education, which will change people's attitudes. So I wouldn't want the Singularity Principles to be characterized as being against the free market or against money. Money is part of the solution, but it's not the whole solution.
Okay. So we agree on this, and I'm glad you put this in. Okay, you insert this into our discussion because I'm the founder of Pole Science, which is not for the money-oriented society, which is for knowledge-oriented society. Okay, in the knowledge-oriented, the first thing we need to do is to solve the problem of value, which will help us decide what are the social priorities. Okay, the Singularity people, they don't have the solution of value. How do they decide what is good, what is bad? I don't see this.
Well, maybe you should have listened to what I was saying earlier. At the beginning, I set out the most important principle is to clarify what are we trying to establish from this, not to just to develop technology because the technology seems cool, or even because it might make us in the short term some profits. We have to look at the externalities. We have to bring in broad perspectives. And then, but most of all, we have to think, what do we want to accomplish? So I'm agreeing with you that the question of value should be forefront. I set out in my book where I think we should be valuing most. It is all-round human flourishing. It includes better health. It includes more liberty. It includes more intelligence and wisdom. It includes more collaboration. I'll be interested in what you think the solution of the value problem should be.
Yeah, well, you see, this is the problem. You see, we don't have a solution. We don't have a solution value. I'm talking to the Federal Reserve right now, Power and his research. I'm going to send the mail to Yellen, is the Secretary of Treasury. You see, they don't have the solution value. That's why we couldn't detect the saving loan crisis, the overvaluation saving loan crisis. We couldn't detect the overvaluation in subprime vote. Okay, now they think we're going into another recession. I disagree. I don't think there's an overvaluation. Okay, the only problem today is the inflation. Okay, you solve inflation by increased supply. Okay, there's a supply chain disruption. Okay, because of COVID, because of the Ukraine war. Okay, so Yana is correct. Yana want to have a temporary ceasefire in the trade war with China. In a trade war, we don't kill people in trade wars. Okay, we try to be polite to each other in business. We try to just get the Chinese to produce more things so temporarily can relieve the supply chain. Okay, then after we solve the inflation, then we can have Trump and go back and put in the sanctions. Okay. There's a trade war. Trade, the business people, they are sneaky. They just change their mind. They go for immediate profit. Okay, this is the nature of a trade war. Okay, so what really involved here is in the last Great Depression, it produced some great economists. John von Neumann, Gerald de Brue, Kenneth Arrow, Milton Friedman. Okay, four of the very important economists. Three of them, John von Neumann started the game theory, which leads to Gerald de Brue's theory of value, which is really the problem of equilibrium. Equilibrium, which means supply-demand model. And Kenneth Arrow supported Gerald de Brue, and John von Neumann is actually who pushed.
Okay, let's move this conversation along. You're going off in a different direction altogether. You're raising quite important points, but it's not the topic for today. I will say this, that you're emphasizing we should be in a good discussion with China. It is important to have that discussion, and that is a point I make in my book as well. Unless we have a better international collaboration on the issues arising from the AI race, we are likely to regret what will happen. So we do need to have more open-mindedness to discussions with all providers of AI. But by the way, what's going to stimulate that discussion is a shared awareness of what can actually go wrong, that people will realize, actually, if we keep going like this, it's a bit like Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev in the days when they were both accumulating more nuclear weapons and they were made aware of the dangers of nuclear winter, which caused them to pause. So I think there are unfortunate AI races just now, which actually transcend in importance some of the economic issues you've just been raising. And we need to get some of the leading Chinese thinkers, leading Russian thinkers, the leading European thinkers, the leading American thinkers to honestly realize, hey, there are bigger dangers that we are unfortunately dancing into because we're not thinking enough, as Rob Enderley said, about what are the externalities of these points. But I hand back to you, Sharif.
We really want to try to stay on topic here. We've been drifting a little far afield. So I support what David said.
Let me make myself clear. Here I'm trying to say, compare the politics-oriented society before and the money-oriented society today. Okay. You see, because I'm going into knowledge-oriented society, my judgment is first we have to get rid of man-made law, have a free market. Then from the free market, we try to see what is the invisible hand. Okay, can we see the invisible hand? That is solution value. Okay, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to see the Milton frame is superior than the singularity principles. Okay, this guy is going backward. Okay, you try to regulate the AI's technology with solution value, not with this man-made singularity.
Would you have regulated the nuclear industry? Would you have said any company can create any nuclear power plant by any design? Or would you have said that there needs to be some constraints? Would not. So he would have been quite happy for nuclear disasters to take place in America. And then you would have said, I think we need some regulations. Thank goodness we had regulations in the use of CFCs. Otherwise, we'd have had a bigger hole in the ozone layer by now. But of course, regulations are a two-edged sword, like all the other technologies, and they require a careful thought. But to say in advance that we can't have any regulations is, I think, going backwards. Sharif, I'll hand back to you. You need to guide us in how you think forward.
Actually, I want to ask you one question. You see, what kind of man-made laws are there in science? There's no man-made law in science. I'm a scientist. Okay? I'm a mathematics scientist, fully technically trained. There's no man-made law in science. I'm just predicting there will be no man-made law in social science as well. So our regulation should be non-viable laws of nature in social science, not this singularity principle. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I have to go for the concluding remarks. First, I want to give chance Professor David Wood.
Well, there's a great deal I could say. The main point is thanks for all the comments. Happily, I think I have anticipated most of them in my book at various points. So if I try very quickly to share my screen again, let's see if I can do that. So here is the table of contents of my book. I hope you're seeing that now. And inside there, I've got a...
no, we aren't. We're not seeing the table of contents.
It hasn't worked.
No.
Yes. I'm adding. Just
it's come now. Thank you. So on there, it talks about, wrong button. It talks about analyze via simulations, which is a very good point that Rob made. So there's a section on there as to how we can simulate things more than before, but we shouldn't just rely on what the simulation says. We need to keep thinking about it too. Earlier on, I talk at some length about the need to question desirability and clarify externalities. Otherwise, we will risk. We think we're getting something good, but it turns out there are bigger side effects, a bit like the plastics that were mentioned. You know, the people who invented plastics never imagined the risks to the broader ecosystem from microplastics accumulating elsewhere. The people who spread DDT to try and combat terrible diseases never imagined they could be damaging other parts of the biological ecosystem. Now, we won't be able to anticipate all of them in advance. That's the nature, which is why, if I come down here, we need to promote not just verifiability, but also auditability, which is the ability to keep checking. And if we find out that people are misleading us, if we find out that people are spreading disinformation, they are trying to cover up things that are going wrong, that is a very serious point. So I could go on at length, but I think I have covered quite a few of the points that my esteemed panelists have raised in this book. I will happily share this book with any of you who want to take a look at it in more detail. Other points I wanted to make, Jason raised a very interesting scenario with Uplift, saying that the alignment problem might be solved there. I addressed something similar in my own comments on the alignment problem. Uplift currently works with a reasonably slow interaction between humans and the AI. If the AI starts going faster and the humans aren't able to comprehend and keep up, then the issue gets harder. In various circumstances, there may be pressure to cut humans out of the loop altogether for running complicated defense systems. You know, when there are dogfights between AI-controlled drone systems and human-controlled drone systems, it's the AI that wins. So there are pressures to leave humans out of the loop. And worse, the AI needs to be understood in what it's saying. And as the AI gets more complicated, if it's opaque, we won't understand exactly why it's saying the things it is. And there is the risk of devious AI, which maybe I should add a slide about. There's a section in my book about why AI might want to be devious. And in adversarial circumstances, it may want to give misleading impressions to some of its potential attackers about what it's doing. After all, we humans are quite devious, I have to say. Sometimes we have had incentives to try and deceive each other, sadly, but that's how our brains got larger, in part, because we needed to keep track of who was deceiving whom, as well as keep track of how to cooperate together. So AIs may have reasons to be devious, and in that circumstance, the mechanisms for alignment in Uplift could be part of the solution, but I don't think they'll be the whole solution. Many more things I could say, but I just want to thank everybody for their very useful comments, which I will bear in mind as I briefly tweak the contents of my book before publishing it in about a couple of weeks' time.
Excellent, excellent, Professor David Wood. And we request
my
from
slides
Walter
are on
to-
SlideShare, if anybody wanted to look at
Okay.
them in more length. And there's a link to my SlideShare on my social media, like my Twitter, DW2, my Facebook or LinkedIn has links to that SlideShare.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor David Wood. I request all of our audience, those who attend today's sessions, please share our content, as well as please read book of Professor David Wood. And if you have any feedback, please share with them. And hopefully it will be very important. And I can ensure that those who are students in our institutions, we will heavily promote your book. Especially this Sunday, we have very special episode with local government agencies and academy. So hopefully it will be very helpful for our youth community. Now, Professor Rob, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
I'd like to expand on two concepts that David talked about, leaving humans out of the mix and the concept of a devious AI, because they're very real concerns and a very real problem. If we look at how autonomous cars are being developed, initially the belief was that if the autonomous system failed, it would hand over control to the human, and the human would then take the automobile and survive any event that the AI couldn't handle. A lot of us watching that referred to that as the half second of pure terror. The problem is that if an AI couldn't deal with it and the human was taking a nap, not paying attention, or even if they were paying attention, the ability for a human to step in and solve a problem at our speed that an AI couldn't solve at its was relatively narrow. Let's just say close to impossible. The result in testing is the person was half terrified that they were going to be asked to step in and do something that they would have no idea or experience to do, and it would get worse as time goes on. Because if you've got a car that's driving itself, why do you need to learn how to drive the thing in the first place? And so the human would become less skilled at driving automobiles as time progressed, while the car was becoming more skilled. And so the current concept is humans don't step in. If the AI fails, it either fails over to another AI system or it pulls over to the side of the road and it stops. It doesn't hand over immediate control to the human, because that would undoubtedly result in an even bigger catastrophe in tests than otherwise would be the case. And in many cases, that's exactly it. If you look at what happens in defense and any types of interactive situation, if the AI fails, there is almost no situation where the human could step in quickly enough to mitigate the problem. And the best outcome is either passing over to a redundant system that could pick up its speed, or just shut the entire thing down, which could be problematic if you're talking about a vehicle or a plane or something in regard to that. So it's keeping humans in the mix, given the disparity of speed in terms of processing power and decision making, is going to be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, and we're already not doing it. When it comes to devious AI, I'll give you an example. I did the postmortem on IBM's near collapse back in the 80s and 90s, and the problem wasn't the CEO, John Akers, who was fired. On paper, was one of the smartest CEOs that IBM had ever had. The reason he failed was because the people feeding him information had come to the conclusion that he only wanted to hear good stuff. He didn't want to hear bad stuff. And so he was completely unaware of the problems that the company was having, and it was endemic and it was bad. With AIs, that problem comes forward in two concepts. One is the information being fed to the AI is being corrupted to predetermine an outcome that whoever is running the system wants. That's seriously bad. That suddenly you're creating a 2001 experience where the AI is going to turn hot, probably not killing people, but could. But the problem is the AI is making very rapid decisions on biased information, and that would be bad. The other thing is the AI learns with deep learning, the AI has learned from actual data, and if it learns that it can be more successful providing information that is what the reader wants to read, much like the algorithms in Facebook do, then once again, it makes the human making the decision less effective, because the human is being misled at scale. And again, you have a suboptimal outcome based on an intentional disruption of the information flow. And there lies one of the biggest problems with technology, whether we're talking about AIs or not, the corruption of information going into the decision process and the inclusion of bias. And we probably should be spending, as IBM has pointed out on several occasions, a great deal more time removing bias from these systems than we are just developing them, because that bias can be incredibly damaging at the back end. And when we go to machines making decisions at machine speeds, bias could be deadly, not only for the implementation, but as we talk about defensive systems, for the country and race. So there are some serious issues that David has accurately pointed out in many cases in his book that probably should have a higher profile than they currently have. But we are entering a very difficult time where the drivers for AI and the people that are attempting to make sure that AIs are being used for beneficial purposes are in imbalance, and correcting that imbalance should be a high priority. And I don't think it's high enough, personally.
Thank you, sir. Mr. David Schumacher.
There's been so much said, I was finding it difficult to decide on just one topic to use for my closing remarks, and I think I'll try this. I want to point out that humans, AI, and nature are, yes, we talk about them separately, but it's all part of the same system. We're all in this together. And I'll give you a modern day example. Something that Ray Kurzweil talks about in his books, the law of accelerating returns. We build the technology, that's humans, that's tech, that's using natural materials, and it's using our natural minds to be able to create this technology. And then we build on top of that technology, even to the point where we can use artificial intelligence to be able to help us build further technologies. And the rapid increase of benefit goes up at an exponential scale. So if you look at all that together, that's all one creation of nature, AI, and humans together. And I think it's a mindset of not drawing a hard line between us and nature that's very important to consider, especially as we go forward with AI alignment, as Jason was talking about. I like the idea of AI and humans collaborating. I see plenty of difficulties with that, but I think we need to stay focused on the fact that we are in one ecosystem together and we need to try to work this out together. And in the end, it will make us human in a different way than we have been in the past, and in another way, more human than we are now. As we have access to more information, as we have access to greater speeds, we can do more of the things that we do today faster. There's a quote from Ray Kurzweil when he was interviewed by the media, and he's talking about our connection to virtual neocortex in the cloud, our ability to be able to handle that at greater speeds than, say, through the interface of the cell phone that we utilize that today. And he says with this greater neocortex, we're going to be funnier, we're going to be better at music, we're even going to be sexier, and we're going to be able to exemplify all the things that we in humans value to a greater degree. So that's optimistic, but I think it points to the fact that we've never been separate and we're not going to be separate going forward. And I think we need to remember that. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you, sir. Professor Edward, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Thanks. We've gone over a little long, so I'll try to be very brief. By the way, I've worked with Milton Friedman, and I consider myself as big a libertarian as anyone. I've got my autographed copy of Atlas Shrugged here. However, I consider myself a reasonable and open libertarian, meaning I realize the importance of freedom, but it always has to be applied to real world and the real world changes. David Wood has done a fantastic job of articulating not only the future to come, which you can find in Kurzweil's books and elsewhere, but most important about how to think about it. I think this book is a model of a real, reasonable, balanced approach. You may disagree with this point or that point, but that's the whole point, is that we have to reason about it. That's the thing that I think is so missing from our society and our culture. And so I want to urge everybody listening in the Asian Pacific area or anywhere you happen to be listening to this broadcast, is that we have to get these ideas and this way of thinking about the future out from our own cloistered hall, so to speak, into the general public. We have to look at actual strategies of spreading the ideas, of making this the defining way that people, influencers, policymakers, and the general public think about longevity, about artificial intelligence, about all the other incredible subjects that if we go in the direction I hope we go in, we're going to have an incredible future. But again, education and knowledge is what is most important. And I'll stop there, and everybody should go read David's incredible books. I'm looking forward to the new one too, by the way.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jason, what's your concluding remarks?
I would like to just echo both David and Edward's remarks about the praise on David Wood's new book. I love it. I like how he's not really necessarily trying to convince you of any particular way. He's setting out all, a well-rounded case so you can see the whole problem in a more rational and encompassing way. And I dig it. I like it.
Thank you. Professor Ching, what's your concluding remarks only for today's topic?
Briefly.
Singularity.
Yeah, well, I really think, David Wood and I are moving in the same direction. You see, we try to make things more rational, but there's this really good deep thinkers, Milton Friedman, Kenneth Arrow, Gerald Bru, John von Neumann. Okay, they are pushing for this solution value. It hasn't been accepted, you see, after the Great Depression. Now we're they think they were going into another Great Depression, but we're not, you see. But the economy, they're just guessing back and forth. Okay, try to pinpoint what is the equilibrium point. You cannot do it by guessing. You have to have the solution value. Go to Gerald Bru. He posed the problem, and the post science, I give a solution. I would love to collaborate with David Wood to put this into addition to this, this deep thinker. We need to bring in this deep thinker. We cannot just neglect them, especially in the money-oriented society, which initiated by one of the big deep thinkers. Okay, so my conclusion just this morning, I have a appointment with NASA to talk about robots, self-manufactured general purpose robot, and I need the solution value to decide what to do. And that's why I was late. I didn't hear David's initial remark, but anyway, I'm here to represent Milton Friedman, so there's no particular hostility to David. Sorry.
Thank you, sir.
And I would
Thank you,
love
sir.
to
Thank you.
collaborate.
Thank you.
And everything is open
Yeah.
to impose science.
Yes.
So that's it. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. Bye.
So I gave a thumbs up to collaboration as well.
Yeah.
You were singing the praises of
Yeah.
Milton Friedman. I'd like to sing the praises of John von Neumann that you mentioned earlier
Yeah,
as
okay,
the giant
great.
of games theory.
Yeah.
He
yeah.
was the person who,
Yeah,
towards the
yeah,
end of
yeah.
his life, did reflect on the fact that the progress of technology was leading humanity into something like a singularity. He used
Yes,
these words.
yes.
And amongst his many other fantastic abilities, he consumed history textbooks at amazing pace. There are anecdotes that when he had cocktail parties in Princeton, some of the history professors were intimidated by him because he had read books in about 5 different languages about the history of Europe, and he could bring up facts that they had forgotten themselves. And his observation about history is that technology is leading in a way that the ordinary condition of human life cannot continue. He couldn't see clearly what it is. We stand on his shoulders, and
Yes,
thanks to all of you for collaborating in clarifying how we can steer this to be more likely to be a positive transformation.
Yeah. He also introduced Kurt Gödel. You see, that's a great contribution. Gerald Bru and Kurt Gödel, two deepest thinkers, among humans. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today's
Thanks,
session.
David.
Yes, World Talent Economy Forum want more collaborations, and we want to collaborate with London Futurist and all other organizations for research and development. And we have some very small request to Professor David Wood, as you are publishing book Developing Nations. I'm sure that you also know you are part of Petronas University as an advisor. So we have 4 different languages in Malaysia. So Malaysia and Singapore. So I request those who publishing book, if you focus on these translations and book translations, like in different languages, maybe our audience, they can like take more of your books, they can understand, and they can utilize your book for their development. So I request those who publishing book, including Professor David Wood and all other speakers, those who joined today, please focus on like translate your book in different languages. It's really helpful. Last we worked with these Singapore government agencies, their utilities department. We also help them to translate their training and book and everything. It's went very well. So I think because our audience from different countries, different culture, different background, different languages, at least top 3-4 languages, if you translate, it will be really helpful for our youth communities, and definitely they also can contribute for your book and research and development, and we heavily utilize it in our classroom, in academy, and everywhere. So thank you. This is excellent presentations. I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government, with corporation, and with academy, and definitely we also present these things. And I want to give a special thanks to Transhumanist Party because they give me opportunity to share my thought. I already share in my social media. This is first time actually I share all the insight of World Talent Economy Forum, and I want to give thanks to all of the leaders from Transhumanist Party as well as our speakers, those who support World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you, bye-bye, and take care.
Yeah, bye. Take care.
Oh, we're still here.